Today I'd like to touch upon the subject of what it means to be psychologically unconscious or conscious. And this is a term that's used a lot in various ways, has been used a lot in psychology, pretty much starting with Freud. And different versions of what it means to be unconscious are taken for granted by different schools of thought in psychology. So with Freud, it's all about this idea that our motivations are kind of so basic and crude that we can't countenance them. So we ascribe different motivations to what we're doing. So I do this, this, and this, and I say it's for all of these motivations. But really, the motivation is base. It's because I want to fulfill some primal urge, whether it's sex or power, even though power wasn't so much what Freud was focusing on. So the idea is that our basic urges are repulsive to our civilized way of looking at things, and so even though we're obeying these motivations, we're claiming to be doing something else. So that's Freud's basic idea of the unconscious. I think it's where stuff is put because we don't want to know about it, because it kind of shatters the ego's fantasies of what a great ego the ego is. The ego has to have a fantasy that it's kind of acting on a noble basis rather than a scurrilous basis. So all of that's good. Freud is often credited with being the one to come up with this idea of unconsciousness, which is a huge idea, because beforehand we're in this position of actually believing our own bullshit. And so here, straight away, we have a way of approaching the notion that a lot of what we say and do and think and hold to be true is bullshit, but we believe it anyway, and that's being unconscious. We're unconscious of our true motivations. There's another way of talking about unconscious, what it means to be unconscious, which is a more essential way, I think. So we can go into that a little bit. And the reason this is important is because if we don't differentiate between unconscious activity and conscious activity, we're always going to be screwed, because unconscious activity never results in what it claims to be interested in achieving. It never succeeds, ever. And given the fact that we're all about success, the idea of having this modality of existence, in which case, when we're in that modality, we're guaranteed to always get the wrong result from the one we want, always guaranteed to fall flat on our faces. That's kind of significant. And yet the whole notion of operating mechanically versus operating in a kind of a conscious way, or having a bit of consciousness there about it, is not at all familiar. It's not at all familiar. We all assume we're perfectly conscious. Thank you very much. I'm conscious. Who are you talking to? Of course I'm conscious. So we have this huge resistance to seeing that. Well, what we don't want to see is that I've got this image of me, of king of the castle. I'm the king of the castle, sitting right on top of the castle, proud as punch. What I say goes. I'm in the dominant position. That is the illusory position of the rational ego. It has to be in that position, otherwise it can't bear to be a mere cog in the works, which is what it is. It has to be a top dog. So there's this fantasy. In reality, The ego is just controlled by stuff that we don't know, unconscious rules and regulations, and it's part of a machine. It's generated by a machine, and it's not in charge at all. It's a dummy. It's like when you get someone and kid him, say, look, you're in charge of this country, you're the boss, but he actually isn't, but you're having a laugh at him. That's the kind of a thing. The everyday centrality of our way of seeing things as I am this person or that person is entirely a fantasy. It's a fantasy because it relates to a type of autonomy which doesn't exist. There is no autonomy in the everyday sense of self. That self can never be autonomous. Ever, ever, ever. Because it's merely a label. It's a label ascribed by the thinking mind, just for the sake of convenience. And it can be convenient for me to think of myself as me, and then you're over there, so you're you. That can be convenient, but it's only skin deep. It doesn't go beyond. The same way that a map can be skin deep. If I do a very rough and ready map, it could be handy, but that doesn't mean that the map all of a sudden becomes interchangeable with the territory. Again, it's just a little convention to help us, which it can do under some circumstances, and it won't help us under others. So the important thing is to know whether this is a useful thing, a useful instrument at all, and when it's not. And if we don't have that key differentiation, then the instrument rules us all the time, because we're assuming it's universally true. Our model or theory or conventional way of representing things to ourselves is universally true, which means it can never be questioned, which means that it rules us. So we are completely ruled by this idea. We're ruled by an idea. And as long as we're ruled by an idea, then that's another way of talking about being unconscious. Our entire lives is an exercise. Our entire life is an exercise in being mechanically shoved from A to B to C to D, and in the end we die. But there's no autonomy in that. It's all just a foregone conclusion. And we entertain this fantasy that we are living creatively, that there is something unique about our existence. So the unconscious life is the life in which we're living a completely generic or second-hand life, completely unoriginal. It's pure plagiarism, nothing original in it. But we have this fantasy at the same time that we are totally autonomous and that we're creative and all the rest of it. It can sometimes happen that this illusion gets damaged. Illusions can be damaged, obviously. No more than if I go around thinking that I'm really great, and one day I'm confronted with evidence that actually I'm a complete jerk and a complete knobhead and complete asshole, etc., etc. That's hard to process, but it can happen that our illusions can be knocked, and then it's like, that's very hard to work with, really, because we can only operate on the basis of me being who I'm not. I can only operate on the basis of me being this person that I'm totally not. It's a total fantasy. So where do I go from there? Generally speaking, when the illusions do wobble and become ineffective, usually we're able to get back again to how we were beforehand. And this is often called therapy, because in therapy these days, in our present modality, we look at therapy as recovering what we've lost. But what we've lost is an illusion. So do we really want to recover an illusion? Admittedly, looking back nostalgically, that was great when the illusion was intact. It seems as if it was great. Looking back, it seems very sort of very rose tinted. It wasn't that great, but I didn't know that at the time because I was very naive and I didn't look into it. So then we have this idea, but based basically on nostalgia, that if only I could go back to how it was when I was ruled by an illusion, without knowing that I was being ruled by illusion, then everything will be wonderful. There's two problems with what. Sure, there's more problems, but there's two that obviously we can think of straight away. One is that, well, the illusion is an illusion. So any talk of mental health is illusory mental health. So we've got to get that clear. And there wasn't any mental health in that situation. There isn't any mental health in the situation of being controlled with our thinking, by our thinking, without realize that. We're being controlled by our thinking. There's no mental health in that, just a false sense of security, which is what we're really after. We want to get back to that false sense of security. When the illusion is damaged and it can no longer give us that sense of security, then of course we're all in a flap. And I don't mean to make light of it, because although there is one sense in which we could say, well, this is ridiculous. I'm in a flap because my illusion's being busted. And if we can see that side, that's healthy. It's healthy because I'm able to laugh at myself a little bit. My problem is that I can't cling on to this illusion anymore. It's worn a bit thin. It's not doing the job anymore. But on the other side, the amount of suffering that comes from having to detach ourselves or disinvest ourselves or disillusion ourselves from the fantasy is atrocious. And in the process of becoming free from our illusions, well, that process is an extraordinarily painful process. There's no bit of it that isn't pain. It's all painful and it's all against our will, and it feels terrible. And as far as we can project into the future, when that process of disidentification or disillusionment is going on, it seems like the end of the world, because what I'm becoming disillusioned with is everything. That's all I ever knew is my idea of life, or the conventional way of understanding life that I picked up from everyone around me. Everyone else's idea of life is the same as my idea of life. So not to underestimate the fact that it's such a grueling process, because it's so thorough. It's a natural process. It doesn't spare us. So where this natural process happens, it's very, very thorough. Every little bit of attachment has to be consciously let go of via a process of suffering, because it's not that we realize that the attachment's an attachment and that we want to let go of it. We don't, and we don't. So it's against our will. And it feels really bad, and we project into the future saying, this is going to a super bad place because everything I know and believe in is falling to pieces underneath me. Now, very, very, very difficult thing to see. Well, we can't see it at that point, really, even though we could intellectually play about with the idea, is that actually this destructive phase of the process is super healthy, because it's getting rid of this illusion that wasn't doing me any good at all. The illusion was only insulating me from life. So it helped me in one way, because I am afraid of life. Generally speaking, we're afraid of life. We'd rather live a safe or sanitized version of it, in keeping with everyone else, because the hero's adventure, as Joe Campbell puts it, is just a bit too adventurous for us, because you can't rely on an adventure having a good outcome, of course. Everything's up in the air. This is the principle of hazard, as J.G. Bennett puts it. Everything's in the air. There are no guarantees. It could all go one way, or it could go another way. It's not scripted. It's not a safe and sanitized version of life. It's actually life, and that's a risk, as the existentialists would tell us. It's all a risk. There's not even a little bit that isn't a risk. It's all a risk, every single little bit of it. So we want to live risk-free, and we do this by substituting the uncertainty that exists in reality with a spurious sense of certainty that comes from having ideas about anything and everything, and then uncritically believing these ideas. So uncritically believing the idea is what gives us a sense of security, even when the idea is a difficult idea and it's like, oh no, this is terrible, because I'm having the idea and it's like, oh dear, this is terrible. Even that sort of idea is giving us security, because it might be telling me, oh, I'm in a bad situation, this is going to be hugely disadvantageous, but I still understand what's going on. And it's the not understanding what's going on, or the not understanding of who it's going on for, or happening to, that we don't like. So we can wrap this kind of little mini discussion about consciousness and unconsciousness up by saying the unconscious state is when we think our concepts and our models and theories about the world are, for all intents and purposes, identical to the world, which means that we live in a world of certainty. Little tiny things might be uncertain. If I flip a coin, I don't know if it's going to be heads or tails. Whoa, what will it be? What will it be? What will it be? Is it going to be heads? Is it going to be tails? But that's trivial, super trivial uncertainty. Because no matter which way it comes down, it's still a bloody coin, and it's still going to be bloody either heads or tails. And even if I spend the next 10,000 years flipping the coin, it's very predictable. It's either going to be heads or tails, and that is super predictable. So that's the certainty. We like to live in a world where all the big things are nailed down, and any type of uncertainties, a little trivial ones that never threaten our actual big picture or the overall overarching picture of the world. So that's unconscious. The reason we can say it's unconscious because there's no connection with reality at all. Therefore, we can't say we're aware or conscious because there's no connection. Reality might as well not exist for us, and for all practical purposes, it doesn't exist for us. It just doesn't exist for us. So we're living in this way that's divorced from reality, and instead of reality, we've just got these dumb old thoughts, which are as dumb can be, like a cardboard cutouts of people, or like a film set that's just a facade. There's nothing in it. Our thoughts were never meant to substitute for life, just as a picture of a roaring fire was never meant to substitute for a roaring fire. Even though we can look at the picture and say, hey, it's a fire, it ain't going to warm us up. It's not meant to substitute. And that's exactly what we've done. And that's exactly what Baudrillard says we've done when he talks about hyper-reality. So if I say that we're all living in a hyper-reality rather than reality, that's another way of saying that we're all unconscious. Instead of being conscious and autonomous, we are unconscious, and we are puppeted by our defined or determined environment without us knowing that we're being puppeted. So we have an illusion of being autonomous. Now, obviously, the first stage to go from that to come back in contact with reality again, because as a general rule, it's good to be in contact, have a connection with reality. Just very basic general rule. If we don't, then we're in shit. If we do, then actually things are going to work out for us, no matter how painful that might be. Cutting ties with reality starts off pleasant, starts off euphoric, feels good. It's a good rush, it's a good buzz, because we've got away from this scary situation of not knowing, or we've got away from this huge risk, this huge existential risk, this giant question mark in the sky. That feels really, really good. But following on from that, it's all downhill, it's all bad news. Whereas when we come into contact with reality, it's tremendously difficult and very arduous. As I was saying, the whole thing is like grueling. There's no shortcuts, there's no easy way to do it. It has to be done the long way, bit by bit, and everything. Nobody gets out without paying down to the last penny what they owe, as Jung says. you just don't get everything. You've got to pay everything. There are no easy terms. And so that's tough. But the long-term consequence is good. Because ultimately, it is not our manoeuvring that helps us, but our willingness to see the truth, as Krishnamurti has said.